Just very eye-opening. Our next guest is on the line, and Jerry, I mean, you and I have both read his book, and we're very excited to speak to him about his book.
We are very excited to talk to this gentleman. He has a lot to tell us, and we're very excited to have him on.
Absolutely. William Akers is with us tonight, the successful and talented screenwriter who has a new book currently on shelves. It's titled Your Screenplay Sucks, and as befits that title, it is a searingly honest and straightforward work that runs through 100 of the common mistakes screenwriters make and how to avoid them. Our good friend Blake Snyder raved, William Akers is a Renaissance man of film who is at once a big studio screenwriter, independent writer-director, and a caring, insightful teacher. He also knows every trick in the book when it comes to fixing a script, and this is that book. You can click on the cover of the book, Your Screenplay Sucks, on our homepage there where you are now, and it will open up a new window on Amazon where you can purchase it, and Jerry and I both highly recommend that you do that. It's a wonderful,
yesterday, and it's worth your time.
Informative and entertaining read. Please welcome to the show Mr. William Akers. Mr. Akers, are you with us?
I'm right here.
That's great to have you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
First of all, let me say, I love the title and the cover photo of your book. I think it is just perfect. And I can imagine... Yeah, I can imagine that's exactly how these script readers feel. You know, they want to get on the megaphone and just scream out, your screenplay sucks. Can you give us a sense of just how many screenplays go through a production office, or a sense of the odds here?
That's a very good question. The odds are, in a way, astronomical, but then again, since most screenplays are terrible, if you pay attention and write a good one, the odds are a lot more in your favor. Readers read between 5 to 15 to 20 scripts a week, and I was in an office one time waiting to go in and see a producer, and was sitting outside, and they had 3 shelves around the walls above the 2 assistants' offices, and I was bored because they were making me wait, and I counted the screenplays.
Oh,
and there were 1,400 scripts sitting there,
God.
And they all had agents.
Right. You talk about that in your book. Yeah,
the competition is intense. I mean, there are a lot of people trying to get someone to read their script, and the readers are, at the same time, they're looking for 2 different things. One, they're looking for the next greatest screenplay ever, because if they find it and latch onto it and push it and it does well, it helps their career.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, they're looking for the script to be garbage so they can put it down and start the next one.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about some of these techniques you can use that you write on to avoid them throwing it in the trash after 10 pages. But tell us a little bit about, set up your background in terms of your career, how you got started, where you went to school, that sort of thing.
I went to graduate school at USC in Los Angeles, that's where I took my first screenwriting class, and I got out of school and optioned a book that had been read to me as a child and wrote that screenplay, and that film got made, which is pretty unusual that your first one does okay. And
that's incredible.
And then I kept, writing after that. I've been writing, for a long, long time. I've had 3 films made and have written for most of the studios and a lot of the networks, but I've been teaching screenwriting for a pretty good while now, and then critiquing screenplays for people also. So sort of 3 different careers at the same time. And I've found through teaching and critiquing that everybody makes the same mistakes, and I found that I was saying the same things over and over and over to beginning writers, and I thought, Lord, what I need to do is give these guys a checklist. Here, go do these things to your script, and then come back to me with a rewritten draft, and that's where the book came from.
Yeah, and you do list, like we said, you list 100 of the most common mistakes and pratfalls that screenwriters often fall into, and how to avoid those. What are some of the issues that keep coming up when you're critiquing scripts? The most common of the most common. I mean, what is something that you see more than any of the other mistakes?
Beginning writers seem to want to put their backstory in the first 20 pages of their movie. They want to throw the backstory into Act 1.
Right.
They want to explain everything and set it up instead of just kind of getting on with the story. One amazing thing that I find hilarious, and I spent a bit of time with it in the book with this, is people there's some genetic thing that writers want to have their main character names all be alike. They
think
think
you go into great detail about that. That was fascinating.
It happens all the time. It's I mean, when I say it out loud, it sounds really silly that you would have Dick and Don and Dave and Dan all in the same scene and think that's a good idea. But it happens constantly, so I harp on that in the book. The character, I tell you, one of the most important things, if like the number one thing, I think, would be to separate out the characters' voices.
Right.
If you've got, a cop from Baltimore talking to someone from California, they're not going to speak the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want your characters' voices to sound like each other, and you sure don't want them to sound like you.
Yeah. This is interesting because you do focus on that quite a bit in your book, and I'm interested in, obviously there's a craft to great storytelling. First of all, I'm interested, do you think that, obviously some of the techniques can be taught, but do you think you have to have an inherent gift for storytelling before you embark on a screenplay career?
You might discover it as you go along. I think I get writers in my screenwriting class, and there's some people who come right out of the gate and are phenomenal. You teach them screenplay format and a little bit about structure and how to create a character, and then when they start writing pages, they're really good. Others take a long time to figure it out. I mean, I'm still figuring it out, and I don't even know how many scripts I've written. It's a long, slow process. I think some people cannot write whatsoever, and they need to be encouraged to do something else. But some people, really have it. The hard part, I think, is and I think all writers ask themselves, am I any good? Should I be doing something else? So it's somewhere in there, it's a thin line you've got to walk on of, I think I'm going to make it at this, even though I'm not really sure I'm talented enough, because it's hard to know. Yeah.
Well, you talk about giving... Oh, go ahead, buddy.
Yeah, and I just wanted to know, when you were at USC, when you went to graduate school, you obviously were taught by Jim Boyle?
That's correct.
Okay, no, because my brother was when he was there, and I was just curious, what did you learn from Jim Boyle?
A lot.
I mean, I can imagine, because I have some of his papers, essays up here, The Screenplay as Apparatus, How to Condense and Expand a Sequence, and so on. And I was just curious, when did you go to school? When was the, what period?
I graduated from USC graduate school in 1983. Okay. So that means I'm 112 years old.
No, you're not. My brother, 3 years after that. But I was just curious. Was a lot of the stuff that you see, we get this thing I noticed in the last couple of years, a lot of the kids going to school now or making films now thinks the past does not apply to them. And I was just curious, the stuff that you learned back then is still relevant today, I would take it, probably more so.
Absolutely. I mean, what I was taught as a graduate student, storytelling is storytelling, whether you're a caveman sitting around a fire or whether you're sitting on your laptop computer somewhere. I mean, they asked Billy Wilder, one of his friends wanted him to get a computer, and he said, why does it make the gags any funnier?
Exactly.
I mean, you can write a great screenplay with a pencil and a piece of paper or on a computer. It doesn't make that much difference. So I think that people need to read old screenplays. I think they need to see old movies. A lot of some of my students have never seen a movie that's in black and white. Some of my students have seen, every single movie ever made. And so it's just different people, approach it different ways. But I think you need to know what's going on, especially you go into a meeting with somebody and they reference Preston Sturges, you're going to want to know who Preston Sturges is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and plus you need to have an idea, as you talk about in your book, on what sells. I mean, what elements are in demand at the moment. But I was also interested in, you talk about giving each character an original voice. Does it go beyond just sitting down and going through the process of writing a script? How important is life experience for a screenwriter?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question, because you look at the guy, I can't remember what his name was, that wrote regarding Henry, and then he went on to do
J.J. Abrams.
Yeah, I mean, he was 7 years old when he wrote regarding Henry, and that's a really grown-up piece of writing.
It is, yeah.
And I think he was 22, something like that. And so he was just, he had not had that life experience, but he made it up. The other thing you can do is you can research it. If you want to, find something out about something you don't know about, talk to people. I mean, you can write a screenplay about a guy who was divorced, whether you were divorced or not. And you don't have to have lived through it. There's a songwriter in Nashville who decided that he wasn't writing good enough songs, and so he dumped his wife so he could have some misery to write about. I think later on he regretted the move.
Only because he didn't get a hit song out of it.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the problems that I have, and I am I'm a really amateur screenwriter, and I don't do it as a serious pursuit. It just fulfills something within me to write. But you talk about the importance of knowing the backstory of the character. There was a conversation that you transcribed in the book where you're talking to a student and you challenge her, your lead character's sick. What is she sick from? What kind of cancer? It's important to know these details about your characters. A common problem that I have is actually speaking the subtext, which is, you spoke about the first 20 pages all being all backstory. I speak the subtext a lot, and it's too on the nose. That's a big challenge for me. Do you find that's challenging for your students as well?
Subtext is really hard. It's hard to get right, and it's really important. You don't want your character to say exactly what they're thinking. You want us to sort of have to figure out what they're thinking. It's another way to think of subtext is the unspoken text. It's what they mean, but they don't say. And the example that I use in the book, which is my all-time favorite example of subtext, is from the movie Bandits, which Harley Payton wrote. And Cate Blanchett is cooking this amazing dinner, and her husband comes in and says, "What's that smell?" And she goes into detail telling him all about it and how, what all this amazing food that she cooked. And he says, "Honey, I'm having dinner with clients." And you just are shocked for her. And it's terrible. And he walks off. And then he comes back a second or two later, and he says, "Sweetheart," and then she says, "Yeah," and when she says the word "yeah," the one word, she really wants to say, "Oh, are you going to stay home with me tonight?" or "Oh, can I come with you and your clients?" That's what she means, but all she says is "yeah," one word, but you get it. And then he says to her, "Why don't you go see a movie?" Yeah. And then the next thing she does is she dumps his ass, and which is what she should do. But it's an amazing piece of writing in that literally it's only one word, but it speaks volumes. And the actors, really good actors, end up cutting dialogue from their scenes. They don't want to say very much because they know their power is in the fewer words they say.
And don't you find that it's, in some ways, it stems from the tendency to speak the subtext, it stems from an insecurity? Because, if I don't make it literal, the reader won't get it?
Yeah, that's a tough question, because everyone that's writing a spec screenplay is writing it for a reader. They're not writing it for a film crew standing around on a hillside making a movie. Right. They're writing it for someone sitting by a swimming pool or sitting in an office reading it, and that reader has got to understand what's going on. And so it's a scary position to be in as a writer, because you don't want to tell them too much, but you don't want to write it so they don't get it. And so you have to hope that whoever's reading your script is on the ball enough to understand what you're saying to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And tell us a little bit about the crafting of protagonists and antagonists and how they balance each other out. What do each of those personalities need? I remember we spoke to an author several months ago, and he made a good point in that when you're crafting the so-called villain of your piece, you have to keep in mind that the villain is actually the good guy in his own story. That was a great way of putting it, I thought. That was a real eye-opener. What are your thoughts on crafting those two types of personalities?
One of the things that I seem to see a lot in movies is what I call the bad guy speech. And protagonist and antagonist are they're two fancy words. I don't really understand what they mean, but I can understand good guy and bad guy because I've been using those since I was 5. But the bad guy often, like your friend said, is the hero of his own movie. In the movie, I think it's called Extreme Measures with Gene Hackman.
Yeah, you use that example, yeah.
he's an older doctor and he's killing homeless men, but the reason he's killing homeless men is because he wants to cure spinal cord injury. Well, that's a good thing, he thinks, except, you know, the hero of the movie wants to stop him from killing people.
Mm-hmm.
And the bad guy is so important, because if you've got a wimpy little bad guy, you can't have a strong hero, because the hero can't defeat the guy over the course of the movie. The opponent has got to be a big, strong something or the other, so the hero has somebody to fight him. And Cinderella is a sweet little girl, and she's got those 3 giant, ugly stepsisters that she's got to vanquish by the end of the story. That makes the fact that she wins the battle at the end much more interesting, because she's had to fight somebody who was, a tough fight.
Mm-hmm.
And the opponent's the most important thing in the story, because they want the same goal that the hero wants. They have got to fight it out to get whatever it is, and if those two people aren't constructed right, you're in trouble. The great thing about writing is you do a draft and it doesn't work, and then you fix it. That's one thing I find beginning writers, and I think this is silly sounding, but I really think it's true. I think computers hurt you in a way, because when you print your first draft on a nice gleaming laser printer, you print it out and you go, wow, this looks good. I'm done. And when you type it on a typewriter, or even better, you write it in pencil, you look at it and you go, this looks like garbage. I better work on it. So you can fix it if you'll go in and rewrite it.
I think you're right. And obviously this book is a perfect place to start if you want to learn how to correct those common mistakes. And you would recommend going through these steps before submitting it to even a person such as yourself, someone that critiques scripts for a living?
I mean, I would love it if someone would read my book, rewrite their script, and then send it to me to critique. And then I don't have to talk about, don't have character names that rhyme, don't do all these, run your spell check, please.
Yeah.
I don't have to say that to them, and then we can talk about structure and character and things that are really interesting, where they're, paying me for my time and getting something more than, run your spell check and proofread, please.
Yeah, exactly.
And people don't. I had an agent who said, I read to the first typo. Well, if you work on a script for 6 months and you've got a typo in the first 10 pages and the guy puts it down, well, that was too bad.
Yeah. So when I lived out in Los Angeles, I talked to a number of script readers, and I asked them, what was a common theme or a common thread in work, and they just said poor writing. Just horrible writing, like bad, the grammar mistakes, spelling mistakes galore. They just toss them. They said they would toss so many scripts on a given day.
Yeah, a reader can tell within 1 page or 2 pages if you know how to write. And there's a lot in my book about what I call physical writing.
Yeah.
No one had ever taught me anything about a sentence construction. I had a writing partner one time who said most important word at the end of the sentence, most important sentence at the end of the paragraph, and that's the only thing anybody ever taught me about how to write a sentence. And there's a lot of that in Stephen King's book on writing, so I was kind of glad after teaching it for 15 years to find out that Stephen King agreed with me. That was cool. But there's a lot in my book about take words out, use the right word, rearrange the order of the sentence. One thing that people don't get right is something that I call image order, which is image order is the order of the words in the sentence. Is that my dogs, someone just drove up.
Okay, all right.
Let me start over about image order before my dogs, they don't like me talking about it. Because they don't agree with it. But anyway, is if someone says the British, let me get this right. Andrew Jackson was captured and shot by the British. Well, that's a nice sentence, and it makes sense, but the thing is, the image order is wrong, and the reader is creating this image in their head 1 word at a time as they're reading your sentence. And Andrew Jackson was captured by the British, but they didn't shoot him after they had him in handcuffs. They shot him first, and then they captured him. And the people, that's one of the reasons I urge people to read their stuff out loud, because as you read this to yourself, it's going to make great sense to you because you wrote it. but it might not make sense to the person who's reading it. And so you read Andrew Jackson was captured and shot by the British. That sounds good to you, but it won't make sense to the reader because the image order is wrong. And that is picky, but I think it's important.
How important is, in terms of writing the dialogue? I know that a lot of amateur screenwriters, they tend to make it dialogue heavy or description heavy. How important is getting that what is the correct balance in terms of between dialogue and description?
Well, the description, which I spend a lot of time with, but you don't have to have correct grammar in dialogue because people don't speak with correct grammar.
Right.
But you do have to have relatively decent grammar in scene description because the reader's going to pick it up and go, this guy can't write.
Mm-hmm.
So that's at least got to be more or less grammatically correct. But with scene description, you've got to tell just enough to get it and then move on. You want the reader to get the image in your mind and then press on. And you don't want to over-describe it. A lot of beginning writers feel like they must describe the production designer's job for the reader, and in fact they don't. You don't want to say, interior Bob's apartment, a crummy-looking place with half-open pizza boxes and the ratty rug and peeling paint and on and on and on. You just want to say, interior Bob's apartment, a crummy-looking room, and then get on with it. Right. Because when I say a crummy-looking room, that put a picture in your mind. It's not totally exactly the same picture that's in my mind, but it's close enough and we get on with it. Beginning writers in scene description often over-direct the actors. They're telling the actors what to do in minute detail. He turns, he looks up, he smiles, he picks up the coffee cup, and all you need to do is say, he walks in, guns blazing, and that's enough. Yeah. So you need to tell in scene description enough information for the reader to understand the story and what's going on and what they must see, and then you do the dialogue. As far as dialogue, you just write your first draft and then cut it and cut it and cut it and cut it and cut it. Every now and then you'll have a big long speech, but when you have one of those, it's a rare event, and you really need to, use those judiciously. But you flip through a script. The first thing anybody does, they pick up a screenplay, they look to see how long it is. It used to be 120 pages, now it's like 115, 110 is the maximum. And as they flip back to page 1, they already at lightning speed getting an impression of you as a writer, and if they see several pages of just solid dialogue, they're going to begin to wonder about this person before they sit down on page 1.
Yeah, because it's not the same as a theatrical play.
No, the play,
it's a visual medium.
David Mamet does not write any scene description in his plays, or at least the ones I've read. He just writes dialogue because he doesn't care what they do. All he cares about is what they say in his plays. But in a screenplay, you have to say, what the people are doing because they got to walk around and pick stuff up and shoot things. Never write a screenplay without somebody shooting something. I think it's so important.
That's rule 101, isn't it? Is that the
exactly? That'll be in the sequel.
That's a whole other book. You mentioned the importance of reading screenplays. I wanted to get your take before we let you go on screenplay titles that you would recommend that novice screenwriters out there pick up immediately.
Wow, that's a marvelous question. Samson Rafelson is good as a writer. Mankiewicz, those are the old people that I'm thinking of.
Mm-hmm.
What I really like, Witness is good. I'm trying to think what I teach in my class. I just had read Slapshot with my students. That's very good. Let me go in my closet and see what's in here. I've got stacks of stuff. Catch Me If You Can, Unforgiven. Playing by Heart is one of the finest screenplays ever.
You love that script.
That's a great one.
That guy can really write great dialogue. Ramblin' Rose is really good in terms of endearment. What else? I'm just looking around here. I've got.
What about Robert Bolt? What about?
Oh, well, don't pay any attention to him for font, but
right.
Lawrence of Arabia is out of this world.
Right.
I mean,
font. You're right.
Because he writes in Times New Roman.
Mm-hmm.
But those are all. Butch Cassidy is wonderful.
Right.
And the great thing, that scriptorama.com is wonderful for that. You can go to that website and read screenplays for free.
Mm-hmm.
Rocky is a great script. Rocky is incredibly well written and very inventive work inside the scenes. What he has those characters do inside each scene is really, really clever. That's an excellent script.
Every time anyone ever said anything bad about Stallone, that's what I'd always come back with.
Yeah,
the man wrote Rocky. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
Incredibly efficient, effective, emotional script that is. A lot of times people recommend the script. I think the old fall buys. Network and Chinatown are usually listed as two of the essentials.
I show those in my class almost every year.
Right.
They're spectacularly good. And Network is Chayefsky.
You also like Patton. You mentioned Patton in your book.
Patton is great. That that opens up with a 10-minute monologue. So what do I know about not having long speeches?
Right. That's
everything, every rule except don't run your spell check. I'd say that's a rule you can't violate, and don't be boring. But after that, everything you have to take with a grain of salt, because the way you do it may be perfect. It's got to be in correct screenplay format. But other than that, just don't be boring. That's kind of the main rule that you cannot violate. And then the other rule is you have to buy my book. No one can be a success.
That's important.
That is an essential rule. And
I need to ask one technical question, though, before we let you go. Between of the two that I know of, the two screenwriting softwares, Final Draft and Movie Magic, if you have something like Movie Magic, is that all right, or should you just go the extra distance and get Final Draft?
I think they're both fine. Again, does it make the gags any funnier?
Okay, I just wanted to ask. Someone professional.
I wrote 9 screenplays in WordPerfect.
Okay.
And sold a couple of those, I think. And it doesn't matter.
Okay.
It doesn't matter. You just got to get it on the page. Whatever makes you feel comfortable, whatever your writing process is, that's going to work for you. And I think that's one problem with beginning writers, is they read interviews with famous writers, and the guy says, well, I do it this way.
Right.
So then the guy thinks, well, then I got to do it that way. When that's not the case, you need to do it the way that enables you to get the words on the page any way you possibly can. Because that's all that matters.
Okay, great. All right,
it's
thank you.
Fantastic book. You're going to learn a lot from it. Your Screenplay Sucks, Mr. William Akers. Click on that icon on the home page and purchase it. The link, the window link will open up for you. Before I let you go, I have to ask something non-screenplay related.
Certainly.
I find it fascinating. You were a contestant on Jeopardy, weren't you?
Yes, right. I was.
Tell me about that experience.
It was absolutely fascinating. They told us when we went up to be on Jeopardy, they said, 2 things will determine whether you do well or not. You'll either know the categories or you won't, and you'll either be able to work the clicker or you won't. And I knew the categories. Oddly enough, that day was my day. I knew the answer to every single question that they asked for the entire half-hour show. But the guy down from me had won 2 games already, and he could click that clicker. And so he was able to answer more questions. And I never knew, you don't ever know whether you got in or not. They just call on you and you go, oh, I got in. The other thing that was really amazing about it, there's a little bit in the book that came from this experience, is when it's over and you lose, because I lost to this guy. He went on to be he won a fortune later. I mean, he went on to win 5 games and was a national champion. But you lose, and the second you sign your stuff with the tax guy for whatever you won, you turn and the assistant is there with your clothes, because they bring you bring extra change of the clothes in case you win, and they do 3 games in a row. But so she's standing there with the clothes and says, Mr. Akers, right this way. And I followed her down this long, the hallway was 4 feet wide, and at the far end of it was a door. And it was about 30 feet tall because it was in a soundstage. And you go down this long hall, and she's talking to you very nicely and kindly and sweetly about the weather or whatever, and she hands you your clothes, and she opens that door, and you step out onto a sidewalk in Hollywood in the blinding sun, and that door closes behind you, and you look back, and there's no handle on the door, and it's over, and they have flushed you, and you are gone. And it's I thought, very American. Once I was done and had lost, they had no use for me whatsoever.
It's a lot like Hollywood.
Yeah.
Kind of.
With that in mind, which one is more of a pressure cooker situation, being on the hot seat at Jeopardy, or trying to pitch your idea to a bunch of suits?
Oh, pitching is murderous. It's so frightening because let's pick a number. Say you're going to get $100,000 for what they're going to pay you $100,000 to write this screenplay. Well, great. They're paying you, in a sense, $100,000 for the screenplay that you're going to turn in 8 weeks. But they're not really giving you the money for that. They're giving you the money because you aced the pitch. So you're sitting there for 20 minutes talking to this guy across the table thinking, wow, I'm about to blow $100,000 if I don't do a good job at this. So it's really scary because you can earn, enough money to live on for several years here in the next 20 minutes of nice performing. It's really hard. Pitching is very, very tough. And I don't understand the emphasis that beginning screenplay world puts on pitching because beginning writers are never going to pitch. If you haven't written a bunch of screenplays that they just adore, they're not going to bring you into the room to pitch. But everybody talks about pitching like you got to go and do it, and you don't. You got to write a screenplay that they're going to want to read, and then they're going to want another one and another one, and then they'll say, oh, tell us, what else you got. But the first, the gateway drug, baby, is that first screenplay.
Mm-hmm.